Recording now.
Fabulous. So, against what we usually do, we're actually going to start on time. I'm very conscious we're quite short with us only having a half-hour slot today, but hopefully it'll be useful and informative. So thank you for joining us today. This is our session on personal perspectives of ADHD. We've got some great panelists with us, Dom and Sara, who I'll introduce to you in a second. Many of us know that ADHD diagnoses have risen significantly in recent years, with many individuals on waiting lists and even more recognising traits of ADHD in themselves, which is why we've got the session we've got today. Sara, do you want for a start to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody, nice to see you all. I am an ADHD coach and neurodiversity trainer. I've worked in the neurodiversity field as an advisor in UK unis, did that for about 10 to 12 years, started as a disability advisor, and I remember doing my first screening with a student for ADHD and going through the DSM-5 checklist and thinking, oh, these is quite familiar, and yeah, kind of recognizing that actually I had loads of traits of ADHD myself. In fact, hit every box of every question. So I took a couple of years probably to digest that, and then as I started specializing more and more in ADHD and autism, recognized that yeah, I definitely did have ADHD, and connected a lot with the students that did have ADHD. I went on to get a diagnosis myself, specialised more and more in neurodiversity, and ended up as a neurodiversity advisor at Loughborough Uni. I went self-employed in January 2024, doing coaching and training, and I work from a strengths-based approach. Lots of people get kind of diagnosed and dumped, and that was very much how I felt when I got my diagnosis. It's you get your diagnosis and then it's like, okay, do you want to try medication? And regardless of whether the answer to that is yes or no, that's it. That's all you're given in terms of understanding how your brain works. And obviously we know that ADHD brains are amazing if we can harness the strengths of them and if we can come up with strategies for some of the things that we struggle with. I have reached a stage in my life where kind of family life, the juggle of all of that, and perimenopause and all of those things are starting to stack on top of the ADHD. So I'm very aware of how some of those things can interact with ADHD as well and can make some of your symptoms worse, more severe. So some of the things that you were struggling with anyway can become even harder. So yeah, that's basically my story. So I now work as an ADHD coach and trainer, and we're going to look at some sort of strategies today, aren't we, Dom?
That's the
We
plan.
are.
Dom, go and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Dominic Bennett. I'm the managing director of a company called Aspire Software Systems. For those of you that have never come across Aspire, which there will be a few people on the call today that haven't, we have two products, one of which is a product that supports neurodiverse and disabled people in the workplace and education via a couple of government grants, which we'll probably touch on later in the call. I've most definitely got ADHD. I've not got a formal diagnosis, and it is probably something that I will be doing in the coming weeks and months, especially having spoken to Sara over the last couple of weeks in arranging this webinar. I've also got dyslexia, so I hear the term neurospicy quite a lot. I would say I'm definitely in that category, and obviously we're going to come on to what are the areas, the traits that we have both got, and then look at, as I say, what works for me that I've just kind of learned over the years that help me with the things that I struggle with that are the traits of ADHD. So yeah, that's me, and a bit about what I do and what we do as a business.
It's quite interesting that you both work in positions where you're masters of your own destiny in many ways. Dom, with you managing your own company, and Sara, with you being self-employed now. I know you spent a lot of time working, obviously, within organisations, but I wonder if that leads into you wanting to play to some of your strengths that you've found along.
Yeah.
So where we're going to start then? This is going to be a little bit of a show and tell. Dom, what traits do you recognise? Sara, how could we support? It will be quite interesting, I'm sure. Dom is not nervous in the slightest. We never like
Yeah, I said this morning what I signed myself up for here.
So these are some of the things that we recognise as being associated with ADHD. I've got a nice little list here. Emotional regulation, rejection sensitivity, motivation, procrastination, impulsivity, memory, attention, self-awareness, and focus. Dom, do you recognise any of those particularly for yourself?
Yeah, most definitely. For me, there's a few that really stick out. Attention is a big one. Procrastination is another big one. And I would say probably one of the biggest, which has kind of helped me in a lot of the ways. Certainly within what I do for work is impulse. And I've learned, as I say, as I mentioned earlier, there's things I've learned over the years to kind of combat those. And impulse is probably one that's I find kind of hardest to combat, because it's something, once I've got something in my head, there's not many things that can kind of stop me, which, as I say, isn't always the best way to think, especially when it's not always the right decision. So yeah, they're the kind of traits that I show.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we had a conversation earlier today about the fact that Dom and I are both in the office. And the reason that we're both in the office is actually because we've got a bit of a project that requires us sitting down and getting our heads together and focusing on something for a period of time. So one of the things that we've done is get our heads together and actually sit in the same space so that we can work through what seems like a bit of an overwhelming task, if you like.
Yeah, well, and that's, well, we had the conversation last week, so me and Gemma in the office on Thursday, we kind of redesigning our website for Aspire, and we recognise that it's quite a big chunk of work, and we kind of said, oh, well, should we do it like in the week after next, or do it on Teams? And again, I recognise that from my perspective, if we kind of delay it and not get it done from a procrastination perspective, I know that I will find it more difficult if the more I delay it. So we kind of agreed that let's meet on Tuesday to do it and get as much of it done as possible. And that's, although we've still not made a start on it, and it's 12:10. So yeah, that's where we are now.
Okay, so yeah, so think about that then. You're already using a few strategies there that you've identified. So you know that you will procrastinate until whatever the deadline is. So bring the deadline forward so that you can get started sooner. And actually body doubling, making sure that you are all there on site to be able to work together. Body doubling is really effective for loads of people with ADHD, because just having somebody else sitting there going, right, we're going to do this now, for whatever reason, it gets our ADHD brains go, oh, okay, oh yeah, better actually do that then now. I think as we were mentioning earlier, the whole sort of impulsivity thing, there's actually lots of strengths associated with that, because it can mean that you take those risks that other people don't. And a lot of entrepreneurs do have ADHD, because actually we do have that sense of, no, I want to do this, I'm going to make it work, I can make it work. And we've often got the passion and the tenacity to see it through and actually do these things. But impulsivity can be a challenge in terms of sort of regulating that, and there are various strategies that we can look at. But just coming back to the sort of procrastination and task initiation and finding your focus, one of the biggest things that we tend to do is to put our goals down as tasks. So when you're sort of writing your to-do list, redesign the website is probably going on there as one task.
Yeah.
As one, that's your task for the day. Redesign the whole website, as though that's something that you're actually going to tick off by the end of the day. But if you actually sort of unpick that a little bit, our brains often struggle with prioritization and actually going, right, what needs to happen first? What needs to happen in order for us to kind of redesign that website? How do we break it down into stages and tasks so that you've actually got a completable task on that to-do list rather than your goal, which is to redesign the whole website? So that's one of the first things, to break things down into as small a task as you can possibly make it. Literally, it something that you can stick a time on. It might be 20 minutes, it might be 40 minutes, it might be an hour, but something that you can literally go, right, I'm going to start this at this time, I'm going to finish it at this time. That you have something measurable that you will know when you've achieved that. So it might be, right, get the homepage sorted, and you might go, right, okay, that's going to take us this amount of time. What do we need to do first to start that? So you're breaking everything down into as much detail as you can so that you can actually identify what steps you need to take first of all. Another thing that I find particularly helpful, and again, works for lots of people with ADHD, is a visual timer. So I've got one of those here, and it sounds quite childlike, but honestly, it does work because it actually gives you a start point and a finish point. So you just turn around the dial to say 20 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever you want it to be, and then a little alarm will go off, but you can visually see the time going down. So it gives you that sense of urgency, which our brains need.
Can I ask you a question on that, Sarah? So
Yeah.
when have you kind of figured out what your optimal time is for a task? Because look, we obviously, given what we do, we know quite a bit about obviously the stuff like the Pomodoro technique, and they suggest that 25 minutes. Now, I presume that's pretty open to interpretation and, well, totally individual to everyone.
What I would say is, for me personally, it depends on the task. There are some tasks that I'm interested in that I'll get into complete hyperfocus, and I don't want that telling me what time to start and finish. This is really useful for the boring tasks that you're going to struggle with, that you don't even want to do really. But the fact that you can literally see the time going down. So I quite often use this for sort of 10-minute, 20-minute tasks, sometimes maybe 45 minutes. But what I would say is it depends on the task. And in terms of an optimal time, bearing in mind that our brains are so interest-based, we have an interest-based nervous system rather than an information-based nervous system. So if we're interested in something, we will find it a lot easier to spend those longer periods of time. It's when it's a task that's really boring that you really do struggle with, that if you can break it down into the smallest possible amount of time, it gives you that easy kind of entry point, because actually you can come out of it after 10 minutes or so. So instead of your brain keeping on going, no, I don't want to do that, no, I don't want to do that, no, I don't want to do that, you've got an entry point of, do you know what, I can see I'm just going to do this for 10 minutes and then I've got permission to stop. So that makes that task initiation easier. Having any kind of route of entry into things is helpful. It might be things like using AI, for example, just to get you started, because it's often that task initiation that's the challenge when our brains aren't interested in it. An ADHD brain thrives on novelty, urgency, competition, and interest. So if you can find one of those 4 things that's going to get you into the task, then that's great. If you can find a way of making it novelty, if you can find a way of giving yourself some urgency and giving yourself a deadline, kind of making yourself accountable to somebody else is a good way of hacking that as well. So actually you've told somebody that you're going to do it and that you know that they are going to check in with you. That can be helpful because it gives you that sense of a deadline. Any sort of competition, any sort of gamification, a way of making it interesting. As we said before, the body doubling is a good one. And also like thinking about where you work best. So if you've got a task that you need to get into sort of deep flow for, then actually, do you work best in the office, or do you find that too distracting? Do you need focus music on? Do you find it helpful to go to a library where it feels like that is a work zone? Do you work in a cafe where there's lots of distracting, not background noise going on, but nothing that's going to distract you too much? Like for me personally, I find it really helpful if I know I've got some really deep work to do. I light a candle, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but a certain lighting and a certain candle kind of gets me in that zone where my head goes into, okay, we're doing some deep work here now. So any techniques like that can help. And what we do with coaching is we'll tend to go back and visit an example of a time where you've been able to get into really deep focus quite easily and it was successful, and then kind of unpick that and go, right, okay, where were you? Like, what time of day was it? How long did you spend on it? What was it about? What were you doing? Just to kind of get you thinking about what works for you, because it is very specific. We'll all find our own things that work for us. And that's why there's no kind of set time of, if you do it for 20 minutes, Dom, that's going to be perfect for you. Because actually it will depend on the task. It will depend on how you're feeling that day, all of those sort of things.
And I get,
is this why I find so many entrepreneurs then have got ADHD? Because I think there is some kind of correlation there, isn't there? I'm not making that up.
Yeah, there's a really high proportion of entrepreneurs who do have ADHD. And you've only got to look at, some of the famous faces who've kind of identified as having ADHD to recognise that is very much true. And I think there's something about as well, for me personally, I have combined type ADHD. And looking back of the years that I spent working in offices, I would be going to get a drink every probably 3 times an hour. I would be then going to the toilet about 3, all the time. I would be going round to walk over and see somebody in the open plan office and have a conversation rather than sending an email. And actually it was because I regularly needed those sort of movement breaks. And if you think about kind of the life of an entrepreneur, where you set your own meetings and schedules, you're able to flex your day in a way that works with that, and a way that, you have your times where you need to be in a calm desk-based environment, and your times where you can move around, and you're in control of that. If you're in an office, you're having to use things like going to the water machine or going to the toilet, or it's quite a different lifestyle. So I think there's that, but there's also the passion and the energy that people with ADHD bring to a project. Very often that will mean that actually we find something we're really passionate about and go, I want to do this, I can make a business out of this, I know I can. So there are lots of sort of different reasons for that. But yeah, there are a really high proportion of ADHDers.
So I'm assuming things like impulse is one of those things where actually it can be a great thing, but also it can be a not such a great thing. I don't know, Dom, if you've got any examples where maybe impulse has taken over.
I mean, probably too many to list. I think impulse is in most things I do generally, and whilst it is great from, and I can't remember who we were speaking to about when we've got one of our products on wellbeing, we launched it pretty quickly, and it was the way we made the decisions. A lot of my decisions were probably impulse based, but equally that made sure we built the app in a time that was probably quicker than most organizations probably could have run, potentially, given the size of our team. And as I say, that was probably partly to do with some of my impulse and some of the team around me that were able to work as quickly as they did. But and I'd say that's kind of what got us there. But equally, not all decisions that I make are the right ones, and that's kind of why whenever we have meetings, whenever the team meetings, and it's quite a big decision. For example, we're redesigning the Aspire app at the moment, and I saw the font and I didn't particularly like the font, and I kind of said, well, we should change it. But that's not really a decision for me to make, because I'm one person and we've probably got somewhere between 17 and 20,000 users on Aspire. Now that's what I think. My impulse absolutely can't make that decision, but I recognize that, and that's why we've since made the decision that we're going to go out to a sample of some of our users, friends, family, to make the decision about what font we should use. And that's, as I say, I guess kind of because I recognize it, and I want the team to not also think that Dom can just make the decision, given how big the decision is for us. So yeah.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, well, just quickly, on the back of your points about entrepreneurs and how a lot of entrepreneurs have got it. I guess I'm in a fortunate position that I am in the position I am in, and I can kind of plan things the way I want to plan things, and I know what kind of works for me to a degree. It's obviously not as simple as that for someone who is an employee that, I don't know, a sales manager that gets meetings booked for him or her, and how do you manage that when you aren't kind of in control of your own diary to a degree, and what isn't booked in? Like what for anyone on the call today, what sort of solutions would you suggest for someone like that?
Yeah, so I would always say, as you say, the impulsivity thing can be a massive strength in lots of ways, but there are also downsides to it. And working in an office environment, or in a role where you have got your time managed externally, you're not in charge of it. It can be a challenge, but I think the clearest thing that you can do is actually communicate with your manager about that, and sort of say, actually, I really struggle with this. Or if you've got a situation where you're in back-to-back meetings and there's no chance for movement break, especially if you're on Teams a lot and that sort of thing, actually just having a chat with somebody about that, applying for access to work potentially, seeing if you can get like a sit-stand desk. I mean, I have a sit-stand desk. I have a kneeling chair thing, so I can move around regularly while I'm talking and while I'm on meetings and listening. Anything like that can be helpful in terms of the physical environment, but also in terms of the way that your day is scheduled, because most of us don't spend a lot of time reflecting on what works for us with that. And again, one of the things that we do with coaching is like, okay, when is your energy at its highest? When do you have your most productive times? Because actually for some people that might be first thing in the morning. Well, if you know that actually you're stuck in a meeting for most of the morning and you've missed what would have been your most productive time to do kind of deep focus work, that's not necessarily going to work for you. It's not always something that can be changed, but if it's something that you're able to have a conversation with your manager openly about, then it's something that can be on everybody's radar and you can look to make things work a bit better for you. Likewise, in terms of your working environment, do you need some noise cancelling headphones in? Is it more helpful for you to work from home when you've got deep work to do, or are you somebody that actually you need to be in the office so you're not, so you do your deep work there? What works for you?
And just on that, and I get when you get a formal diagnosis, like I said, I am 99.999% certain I've got ADHD based on obviously the traits we spoke about earlier, in the same way that you mentioned earlier when you sat down with a student, and it's like a light bulb. You feel like, oh yeah, I've definitely showed the same traits as this individual. But where I guess some people are at now with ADHD going up and increasing is I recognise that. So I think once you recognise the fact you've got ADHD, you've probably got it, because you recognise the fact you've got ADHD. You're smart enough, intelligent enough to realise that. What are the benefits of then formally getting a diagnosis? Because I guess not all individuals would know those things that you just mentioned. Like I might not know that noise cancelling headphones are going to benefit me. Are those the kinds of things that you're going to get from getting a formal diagnosis, or is that something that a coach would support you with, or is that just based on personal preference?
Yeah, so what I would say is that at the point of getting a diagnosis, it doesn't kind of magically open the doors to all of these things. You'll probably get asked whether you would like to try medication, and that's pretty much where it stops. What you can do is apply for access to work, which you can also do that before diagnosis, but you can apply for access to work. It usually takes about 9 months, the process does, and then you will have an appointment with an assessor, and they will discuss with you what you struggle with, make some suggestions as to what might be helpful. So it might be things like noise cancelling headphones. You will have to put down a name of a contact at your employer who can confirm that you do work there. If you're self-employed, then obviously you will have to prove that you are self-employed. But that is something that access to work can support with in terms of kind of making some suggestions as to things that might be helpful. It can also pay for coaching. So lots of people do get coaching funded through access to work. So that's another aspect that might be helpful. I think really getting a diagnosis is something that if you think you want to apply for, if you think you want to try medication or you want to go down that route, then it's definitely worth doing. If you're self-identifying, the best thing that you can do is start to understand more about ADHD.
Yeah.
And one of the big ones for lots of people is actually like the emotional regulation side of things like rejection sensitivity. I mean, once I recognised that I had ADHD, I could think back to other situations over my life where, things like the classic like praise sandwich at work, where you'd have a one-to-one with the manager or end of year review or whatever, and you'd get that praise sandwich and the filling, the negative feedback that they wanted to give you. I would come home and that would be all I could think about. I'd have totally forgotten the praise on either side. And by the next day, like I'd have convinced myself that I was rubbish at my job, that I needed to do something else, that I needed a whole new career, and might well have handed in my notice by the following week, which admittedly is not the way to go. But being able to recognise when actually that was kicking in, and that the rejection sensitivity meant that I was, feeling that really deeply, and that emotional roller coaster was impacting me far more than actually it needed to. And it's not that knowing about RSD makes it go away, but it's the ability to kind of name it to tame it and be able to go, okay, this is what's happening for me. I know that this will pass. At the moment, it feels really intense, but it will go. Doesn't mean you're bad at your job. Doesn't mean you need to hand in your notice and find a completely new career and turn your latest hobby into your career.
Yeah, but I guess that's so important though, that you actually that comes with realizing or recognizing you've got ADHD. Now that's not always the case. Some people some people just show that as a trait as ADHD, and because automatically when you say ADHD, it's procrastination. Everyone jumps to procrastination. I can't concentrate. I've got ADHD. I'm hyperactive or whatever it is.
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily, with someone that wouldn't, or isn't, I guess, in the line of work that we're in, that we have a pretty good understanding of what ADHD is and the impact it has and the different traits it shows. For someone that has no idea about that and is just sensitive to negative feedback, I guess, that could be a massive impact on someone's career and ability to bounce back, I guess, in work. It's
Yeah, hugely. And I think it's one of those things, like everything with ADHD, what people see externally isn't necessarily what happens behind the scenes. You know, people used to say to me, oh, I don't think you can have ADHD. You're really organised in work. I was like, yeah, because I work really hard to stay as organised as I can in work, because I know I'm naturally not a very organised person, you know, so I have to put in loads of strategies and work really hard at it. Again, it can often present as like, it can often be anxiety. So people don't necessarily see that because you might appear really confident in things, but your brain could be overthinking every little aspect. So that hyperactivity can be internalized in people with ADHD as well. So very often people might not externally show those traits where people go, oh, I think you've got ADHD, you know. So it is about really understanding ADHD and about what it means. You know, there is a 30% delay in executive function. That doesn't mean those skills can't be learned, but we just have to work harder at it. So yeah, understanding is kind of key to unlocking your own brain and working with your brain instead of working against it. You know, we've spent years trying to work in a neurotypical way that doesn't work for us. And that's why lots of us end up going self-employed, actually, is kind of because of that. But also the passion and the energy that we can bring to tasks. You know, there are so many strengths that come with ADHD. And if you're not utilizing them, then actually you won't feel kind of job satisfaction as well. So yeah, just being aware of how it impacts you can be really helpful. And that's where coaching can support with that, to get you kind of understanding what your strengths are, what you need to help developing some strategies for, and what you're already doing that works really well for you, because everybody develops strategies over their lifetime. You know, if you're an ADHD, you've had a lifetime of struggling with these things, so you'll already have loads of strategies in place that you perhaps don't recognize yourself. So yeah, it's really just about understanding your brain.
So Sara, I'm just thinking about a lot of people that we work with and individuals who've been, I'm certainly thinking of friends of mine who've been newly diagnosed with having ADHD. How can they open up conversations with their managers, whether, you know, especially if you've not got a diagnosis, I guess having the confidence to say to a manager, I struggle with these things. How can people begin to think about opening up some of those conversations and maybe ask for help and support?
Well, one of the things that I would say to people in these situations is, if somebody came to you and said that, what would your reaction be? You know, you wouldn't want to instantly shut them down. You wouldn't want to say, no, you haven't, having no experience at that. You know, you would actually want to listen and go, okay, what can I do to support? If you're somebody's manager, you should be looking to see actually how you can support them with that, even if they are undiagnosed, you know, even if they are in the very early stages of exploring the fact that they think they might be at that stage. So I would always encourage people to just open up the conversation, even if it's just informally saying, do you know what, I think I might have ADHD. I would advise that you probably do it one-on-one rather than kind of in the middle of an open plan office, but you know, just getting that conversation started, so that actually you can both start to think about it. It should be a collaborative approach. It shouldn't ever be a case of, all right, well, these are the adjustments that we put in for people who've got ADHD. It should be, okay, what are you struggling with, and working together. As a manager, things like making sure that you are giving kind of written instructions for things. So follow up with an email as to when something needs to be done by, giving deadlines and regular check-ins so that there's some accountability. People with ADHD can often really struggle with kind of long deadlines. I know there's a lot of people from universities here, and I used to find, certainly when I worked in a university and when I was a student, that actually being given a deadline in 3 months' time is really quite challenging for somebody with ADHD, because our tendency will be to just leave it until a week before the deadline to get started on it, when actually what we need to do is have some accountability earlier on. So, you know, if there are students in that position, I would advise even just like checking in with somebody else on your course, setting mini deadlines in place so that you're starting to understand that you know that your inclination is to work in that way, and that you are going to struggle with long deadlines, and kind of, yeah, just thinking around that. If you're in a work environment, have you got a manager that can regularly check in with you? If you're a student at a university, have you got somebody that you can just check in with and set mini deadlines in place?
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the things that we recognise as being associated with ADHD. We've talked about a couple of things that Dom struggles with, and we've talked about some of the strategies that you use in terms of timing and coaching and those things that people can tap into. So I guess one of the things to highlight and just let people know is that in order to try and access to work, which is a government grant where you can go and get additional support and you can access coaching, you don't need to have a diagnosis. And I think that's really key for people to know, that you don't have to have a diagnosis in order to seek support, that having open and honest conversations with managers can be particularly useful. And actually, when I think about it, we do have a resource on Aspire which helps people think about the things that they struggle with, and there is a resource on there that people can share with their managers. So if anybody is interested in accessing that, we're certainly happy to send some of that through to you guys. Or if anybody wants to hear any more information from Sara or from Dom on his personal experience of his journey discovering ADHD and what that looks like. Dom, what's the biggest thing you've learned in the last few years, just to put you on the spot?
I think for me, it's leaning on colleagues and the wider team more. Like I accept, and it's as I mentioned earlier, I'm dyslexic as well, and it's things. Actually, my first job, I think someone from 4Recruitment's on the call, or was certainly registered. As I said, I'm dyslexic, and I was sending out emails that I never told my boss that I was dyslexic. And she's picked it up straight away and said, "You've proofread these emails," and I kind of had skim read, but I'm dyslexic, so it was kind of pointless anyway. So that then became a process. Everything got proofread, and I've kind of used that in everything I do going forward. And that's the kind of same with any ADHD traits. It's making decisions that, well, it's not a decision that I can make just with the click of a fingers. It needs to be thought of. We need to go through a process before decisions are made, and making sure I'm leaning on the team around me to make sure that the decisions are right. I think that's one of the key things I do, and I think I do quite well. But that's kind of been forced on me over the years, and you figure out that kind of works well for you, and it's a decision you can't really afford not to do. I guess for me is one of the key things.
And what about you, Sara? What's been your key learning, or what would be the thing that you'd recommend people tap into if they're wanting to find out a little bit more about ADHD and how to help support themselves?
Yeah, so I think firstly, the understanding is the really key thing. So, listening to podcasts, reading books, potentially having some coaching, even if you're undiagnosed, you can book in for some coaching just to understand your own brain and ADHD a bit better. I would also say, similarly to Dom, actually, a lot of the things that I will struggle with and procrastinate are the things that actually just aren't really my skill set, and kind of sometimes being able to go, okay, I'm not really very good at this. This isn't where my strengths lie. What can I do to either help make that easier for me? It might be following other people on Instagram that will give me tips on social media and that kind of thing. I don't really enjoy selling myself. I could sell somebody else's things absolutely fine, but I don't really like talking about myself on social media. So I know that's a barrier. I know that's something that I have to work hard towards. So again, enlisting the support of other people who are good at that stuff is really helpful. I think as ADHDers, we're very often like, oh, I can do that. Oh, and I can do that. Oh, yeah, I reckon I could read a book on that and do it. We're keen to want to try and do everything ourselves. And we kind of get FOMO on not doing that almost. But actually, sometimes recognizing these are the things I'm really good at. Let's put my energy into that. And if I can outsource that or lean on a colleague for that, let's do it that way, because it just works far more effectively.
And I think so. I don't associate as having ADHD, but I recognise as somebody that is neurotypical that actually some of those skills I also use in my day-to-day life. So there's definitely things that I'm stronger at in terms of my skill set and my jobs, and things that I'm weaker at. And actually that comes down to teamwork as well. And I think about the way Dom and I and the rest of the team work together, that all plays into that. So yeah, amazing. All right, well, thank you both very much for your time. Thank you, Dom, for being so honest about
You're
your
welcome.
experiences and where
Does
you've
anyone
come
have any
from.
questions out of interest? I hopefully have answered a lot, but
I don't think there's any questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to put a question in the chat or in the Q&A, you're very welcome to ask.
we've got a couple of
Otherwise,
minutes.
we may look to do another one of these sessions in the future where we tap into some more detailed areas of ADHD and explore some of those things. But yeah, amazing. Thank you ever so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.